Okay, mic check, mic check. So I just want to do a quick video. I had this conversation earlier, mostly with myself, but I put it out there on Twitter and got a couple interesting responses. But pretty much, my top five in the MVP voting this year, if I were a voter, just based on the total season, the ending of the season, how everything kind of shook out, who I think the top five are, including obviously who my pick for MVP would be. Look, I'm gonna be a little biased, right? I mean, I don't fucking care. It is what it is. I think the voters are probably on my side as well. But yeah, my top five, and I'm not gonna lie, there's a little bit of controversy. I think that I have a couple people maybe further down, or have someone in my top five that most people don't. And I'm gonna give you some pretty good reasons on why I think that is. So at number one, I have what I think will be the consensus, or amongst the voters, the majority consensus player in the back-to-back to not back, but MVP, Finals MVP, back champion in Nikola Jokic, right? We're talking about someone who is having a better statistical year than he had last year, led his team to more wins than he had last year, did so without the second best player, Jamal Murray, for a 22 game stretch this year. That's also him nursing along a young bench of players that have been drafted in a couple years, in Christian Braun and Peyton Watson. Even Julian Strawther got some time. The rookie got some time in there. We lost Bruce Brown. We lost Jeff Green. DeAndre Jordan as a backup. Dude's really just like basically another assistant coach. And without lamenting Reggie Jackson too much right now, he was not a net positive for this team. So Jokic carried his team to 57 wins, which is a franchise record, ties a franchise record from the 2013 Nuggets with George Karl. They should have probably won 60-plus games this year, I think, if Jamal Murray was healthy and the team just didn't get really lazy down the stretch. Couple weird losses. But either way, the team won 57 games. They tied the West and OKC with 57 wins. Obviously, we lost the tiebreaker to OKC because of a couple games we played earlier in the year, so we lost the in-season record between them. But 57 wins. He leads in every advanced metric in terms of efficiency that calculates how much Jokic actually means to the Denver Nuggets offense on a night in and night out basis, with or without Jamal. The fact that he's doing it without any other all-stars on this team, right? Like, despite Jamal Murray being the player he has not been voted into an all-star game, and this year was another example of that, especially with the injuries. And Jokic makes this team look better than it is, right? People will say the Nuggets have the top five, the five best starting rotation in the league, but that case because of Nikola Jokic, because of his vision, because of his ability to spread the floor, put guys in the best position to win, and they run that entire offense through him. Not to mention that the biggest knock on Jokic has been his defense over the last couple of years, and why people said that he didn't deserve MVP over Embiid or Giannis the last couple of years was how bad, quote unquote, the Nuggets were defensively, which with Nikola Jokic. The Nuggets will be tied for 8th in the league in defensive efficiency or rank at the end of the season. They have a top 10 defense, a top 8 defense, and a lot of that is anchored by how much better Nikola played defensive this year. He's not your stereotypical shot blocker, rim protector, but he averaged like almost 3 steals a game, I think. He doesn't get a lot of blocks because he takes the ball on the way up because he doesn't jump. But his ability to guard the pick and roll, he wasn't a liability in pick and roll. He wasn't a liability on the perimeter. There's been some games where he's got cooked against other centers just because Nikola is very choosy with when he decides to play defense hard. And sometimes it's better just to let whoever, that Bam Adebayo or, whatever center it is that he's going up against, have a big game because it doesn't allow the rest of the offense on the other side to flourish. And I think it's all strategy with him. We've seen Jokic lock down on defense, especially when he played guys like Anthony Davis. We saw it in the playoffs. So with all that being said, I know he doesn't have the statistical numbers as far as points per game, which people seem to always tie to the MVP. But the reality is we have a scoring title for a reason. It's different than the MVP. And if we're talking about, the best player that's on the best team with the second best record in the league, only to Boston, I think it's clearly that Jokic is the number one. He is our MVP, and it's not going to make people happy. There's going to be a lot of fatigue there, but I think the voters understand what he's done this year and how amazing it is, and that he's almost going to average another triple-double as a center, right? Number two, to me, and this might be controversial again, is going to be a guy who led his team from not making the playoffs last year, who basically decided to tank at the end of last year, and he led them to a top 5 seed in the West, one of the most fun teams to watch down the stretch, one of the more productive teams, hottest teams down the stretch, and that's going to be Luka Doncic, right? He's the second best player in the world, in my opinion. He plays a lot like Jokic, but maybe from the perimeter instead of inside, which makes sense because he's a guard. And we're talking about a guy that's basically unguardable. There's nothing you can really do to stop him from putting up 30-plus points a game. And not only that, he rebounds the ball, he assists. The biggest knock on Luka could be potentially his defense, but when he's scoring and assisting in that much of the game, then it's really hard to be overly concerned with that part of the ball. But again, that's maybe my knock on him, and why you can't, maybe why I don't have him over Jokic. But if you wanted to argue Luka 1, Jokic 2, just due to the fatigue with Jokic, I can also see that as well. I think Jokic is obviously the best player, the clear MVP standout this year, especially with Embiid getting hurt early on. But, you can make a case for Luka as well, which is why I have him at number 2. Number 3 is going to be where things get a little bit controversial. I think this is where I'm gonna get a few replies and hashtag you don't know ball, or they're gonna start calling me white boy like Drake, unfortunately. But I do think that my number 3 is a dude that has taken, and there's obviously a Western Conference bias when it comes to MVP candidates this year. Obviously, the first two being Jokic and Luka, who are both in the Western Conference. A lot of people who I have a little bit further down the list is potentially the number 1 guy, who's also in the Western Conference. But my number 3 is a guy that his second year in this conference on that team has taken a team from the laughing stock of the league to relevancy, and that's Jalen Brunson. Right, we're talking about a guy who lost his second best player in Julius Randle a couple months ago. He propelled that team alongside the defensive OG Anunoby to the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference Finals, in the Eastern Conference. And I understand the Eastern Conference is not as strong as the Western Conference, but I think that team equally would be in the playoffs or in the tops of the seeding in the West as well. They've had some injuries which have led to their up and down season, but he single-handedly makes the Knicks a team that you can actually watch and enjoy watching. He plays hard every night. He balls every night. He's averaging almost 29 points a game, 5 or 6 rebounds a game, 6-7 assists a game, right? We're talking about a dude who has propelled that team to where they are and has taken the Knicks from the laughing stock of the league to a team that potentially, if things fall their way, can make a run similar to how Miami did last year. And he's doing it on a team that, on paper, you're not entirely sure that this team should be a number 2 seed, but that's even more of the reason why I think Jalen Brunson is a top 3 candidate for MVP this year. And I think that to leave him out of your top 5 MVPs is insane, considering how well he's played and where his numbers are in comparison to other guys that are on this list. And also how important of a season he's had in the Eastern Conference and for that Knicks team to put them in the position that they're in. And I think that as much basketball as I watch on a nightly basis, and because I'm a total degenerate, it's too much, right? But I have Jalen Brunson as my number 3. And at number 4, I have a guy who I feel everybody has right there at 1 and 2 this year. And I'll give you some reasons why I feel like he is number 4 on my list, and that's going to be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, SGA. At parts of this season, SGA looked like the best player in the league. There's games and moments that he had, and you were just like, yeah, clearly this dude is ascending, right? My biggest knock on why I don't have him as MVP is simply due to the fact that OKC team is sorely underrated in terms of what people think around the players that play around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The team is superbly talented. They've been stacking players. They have a potential rookie of the year and a second year player in Chet Holmgren. You have Jalen Williams, who is an ascending player who I think in the next couple of years people are going to start looking at as one of the top wing players in the league, just because he can do it all. He can play defense, he can rebound, he can score, he can shoot the three. We're talking about a guy that could be 1A, 1B with SGA on that team, and I don't think he's getting enough credit. I don't think that OKC team is getting enough credit. I don't think their coach, Mark Nate, whatever his name is, I can never pronounce his last name. I don't think he's getting enough credit. And I think overall, SGA is a byproduct of a really, really solid, deep, young team on a franchise that's done really well over the last 3 or 4 years since they traded assets for Paul George, and is extremely well coached. And I think that that's the first knock. The second knock that I have on him is in terms of the MVP voting, the way he's ended the season, right? He had 5-6 PTO games at the end of the season, along with Jalen Williams, where he just sat out, right? I think they gave him an injury designation. I'm not entirely sure what it was, but I don't know how valid it was. It clearly was them giving him some PTO prior to the playoffs starting, just because of how close the West was. I don't think they felt like they would drop too many games with the schedule that they were on. Unfortunately, though, him not playing, along with Jalen Williams not playing, OKC literally dropped to the 3rd seed in the Western Conference in that stretch. I think they still won 3 out of 5 games or something like that. But yeah, they had a couple games skid and they lost their first seeding to the 3rd seed. And had it not been for, the Nuggets having a complete aneurysm against the Spurs on the road, the Nuggets would have the number 1 seed, and OKC would potentially have been playing for the number 2 seed today against a Dallas Mavericks team who literally played nobody. So the combination of the Nuggets fumbling the number 1 seed, the combination of Dallas not playing their starters because they have nothing to play for in the last game of the year, and Minnesota having to go against a Phoenix Suns team fighting for a top 6 seed to get out of the play-in, the Thunder literally backed themselves into a 1st seed. And I think they could have clearly had the number 1 seed wrapped up by the last game of the season had they played SGA and Jalen Williams down that 5 or 6 game stretch where they didn't play. And because of that, you don't get to just take PTO off at the end of the season, especially when the seeding is so close in the Western Conference, and say that I should still be MVP. I have my other thoughts and qualms with SGA's game, right? It's a topic of conversation that he is a foul merchant. I think that I don't blame players for doing what they need to do to get to the line to score points. There's been a couple moments this year where SGA clearly was stat padding to get to that 30-point mark to keep his average up. I saw it at the end of a game. They were down 10, 13 seconds left. He fouls on purpose just so he can get the ball back, runs down, scores a layup with nobody playing defense. Those little things stuck out to me, and clearly it was important to him to continue his 30-point average. He's not even averaging the most points in the league right now. There are 2 or 3 players averaging more points than SGA, and you can't really give the nod to the number 1 seed because they tied the Nuggets with the record and fell ass backwards into the number 1 seed this year. And yes, they got it. I'm not saying they don't deserve it, but using that as a reason for him to be MVP over someone like Luka or someone like Jokic, when Luka's clearly not on as talented of a team as maybe the Thunder are, or as well coached, right? I think the Mavericks have a good team, a lot of older veterans, and then obviously the combination of Luka and Kyrie make that team very good. Maybe even more so than what actually is in Denver, right? When we break the players down, but those are the reasons why it's kind of a knock on SGA. And SGA is going to be in this conversation the next few years. He's only going to get better than he is now. He had a remarkable season. I just think if we're talking about MVP and we're looking at the separators, and you have to nitpick all the little things when you're choosing to place these guys in the top 5, I don't think the SGA's impact on OKC was more than Jalen Brunson's impact with New York. We're talking about a guy that averaged 36 and 5 versus a guy that averaged 28, 6 and 7, right? We're talking about a point, we're talking about less than a point per game, and then a couple points when it comes to total points. And Brunson played in every game that he could this year. There was no PTO time. He played every game. He played hard. He plays both sides of the ball. And so I think that's why I have SGA at number 4. Then at number 5, simply for the fact that they have the best record in the NBA. I have Jason Tatum, and he's the quote unquote best player on the best team, and so it would be probably sacrilegious to leave him out of a top five when you're in terms of MVP. I mean, if you have the best record and the best player in the NBA, right, he should clearly be an MVP, but there's a reason why he won't and why people don't have him, and it's just because Boston has been so underwhelming when it matters. Him and Jaylen Brown are 1A and 1B. The team is super stacked, lots of talent. They play in a really terrible conference, and they definitely beat the crap out of really shitty Eastern Conference teams all year. A lot of teams that were injured. So we're not as impressed. I think overall, I think we're all in agreement in terms of where Jason Tatum stands. And obviously he'll have this playoff run to prove a lot of people wrong, and maybe, if he has the same season like he had this year, next year, there'll be some makeup votes. But that's who was rounding out my top five. Jokic, Luka, Jalen Brunson, SGA, and Jason Tatum. Those are going to be my top five. Controversial, whatever. I think I've made a pretty fair point, right? Obviously, there's a little bit of bias, but I don't think that my bias affects who will actually win the MVP in terms of Jokic, just because a lot of the advanced analytics matter, right? I know people are like, oh, stats, like,